Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and this is one I'm really excited about. I've actually been anticipating making this video for a while, as I have been carrying this knife for some time and totally loving it. This knife is a knife that initially I got thinking, you know, I'd like to add it to my collection. I like it because it's different, because it has a different look, different blade shape. And I'm like, yeah, that's a really good collection piece. I didn't see myself EDCing it a whole lot. However, once I got this thing in my hand, I was in love with it. I cannot tell you how it feels. The flipping mechanism is amazing. The closing, the operation of the knife is smooth as silk. This is smoother than some ball bearing pivot knives that I have, and it is not ball bearing, it's washers. Just very, very well done. It is different because it's got the aluminum bolsters, it's got a very, very different blade shape. I don't even know what to call it. I'm going to say a modified reverse tanto. Anyway, just great. Now this knife is also available in all black with serrations, but as far as I'm concerned, that kind of ruins the look of the knife. I know, you know, it's really popular to have the blacked out version, but one of the things that makes this knife so interesting and so cool is the bolster and the satin finish and the way it catches light, and you know, the combination of all this makes this a real piece of artwork. When you just paint it all black, you kind of cover up all the beauty of it. Now I know there are some of you who probably just love everything blacked out, and that's great. More power to you. And I like that too. And I do have a lot of knives that are all blacked out. But I just think this one was meant to look like this. This thing is amazing. Now, let's get into the size and weight, because it is a big knife and it's a heavy knife, okay? So this thing, it's a 4-inch blade, a full 4-inch blade, and every bit of that is cutting edge. You have 5 inches of handle here, and you have a lot of thickness. It's about 5/8 of an inch thick. So when you're carrying this knife, you do kind of notice it. It's pretty big and pretty thick. But having said that, when you get it in hand, you're like, holy cow, the handle is just perfect. It's so comfortable that it really wins. And when you get the blade out to do something, you appreciate the cutting edge that's there. Especially, I found this knife excellent for working on a surface like this. You can see how it kind of keeps your fingers out of the way. So I have loved using this knife and will continue to love using it. I can't tell you, when you flip the thing out, I can't describe how good it feels. It's just perfect deployment. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just had to mention that. So this thing weighs in at 6.2 ounces. Okay, so it's heavy. 6 ounces is heavy for a knife, even a knife of this size. To give you a comparison, here is the Cold Steel Recon 1. You can see that it's slightly bigger, about 1/4 of an inch bigger. However, this only weighs 5.5 ounces. So this outweighs it by a good more than half an ounce, and it's a little bit smaller. Now, you know, I've got the Recon 1 is very, very weight efficient, so it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but you just need to know this is a little heavy. Now 6 ounces is not the end of the world. I have other knives that weigh that much, and I carry them, and that's fine. I don't have the magic number like Nut and Fancy. If it's over 4 ounces, I'm not doing it. This knife is well over 4 ounces. I still carry it all the time, and I still am totally in love with it. Even with the thicker handle, I'm like, that's fine, because it's such a cool blade. So size and weight, 9 inches, 4 inches of blade, 5 inches of handle, 5/8 of an inch thick. It's a big, heavy knife, but I think you get enough out of it that it's worth that extra couple of ounces, okay? The blade is one of the really cool things about this knife. Let's get to the blade next, and I will zoom in for that. And I'm just going to move over to the side here a little bit. There we go. So this blade is 4 inches of Aussate steel. It's got this nice hollow grind, and it's sort of, as the Apostle says in his review of this, it's like a modified reverse Tanto Warncliffe something. It is a very different blade shape, but a very functional one. And I want to point out that the functionality of this is kind of very broad. Now, the one thing I wouldn't say this is great for is like a hunting, skinning knife, because it's just a little bit too straight, okay? You need some belly there. However, everything else, this is going to do really well. I've done a lot of cardboard cutting, I've done a lot of food prep, I've done a lot of packages, and I would add to the fact that this was initially designed as a combat folder, and you can see if I hold the knife as it's naturally meant to be held, that the point here ends up being sort of straight at my target. Now, it's a little bit canted, but as you look at my whole arm, the force lines up quite nicely, and you're going to have no problem. So there's a great deal of penetrating strength available here. And of course, like all reverse tantos and even normal tantos, the effort is made to carry a lot of thickness, a lot of width of steel out to the end of the tip to strengthen the end of the knife, and certainly it achieves that. Now, having made that point, I don't know that this is perfectly suited to combat, but it's certainly capable in that role, okay? And I would say, for the blade size, if you're carrying this primarily as a self-defense tool, there's a huge intimidation factor. Look at that thing. Plus, you've got a very, very deep finger choil here, which means you're not going to come forward onto that blade no matter what you do. Okay, now in terms of blade, there is one complaint that I want to make. Now, this blade is beautiful. I love the grind. I love the top swedge. You know, there's just a very slight curve here in the back of the blade that kind of follows the curve at the front. It's just gorgeous, and it's very different, which I just love. You may have noticed that in my collection, I'm drawn to things that are done just a little bit differently. I'm drawn to designers and companies that are willing to do things just a little bit different, which is one of the reasons I like CRKT. They tend to be willing to try things and come out with knives that other companies probably wouldn't touch just because they're too different. Anyway, this is different in a way that's totally awesome. And I've got to say, I'm very impressed with the cutting ability and the EDC performance of this knife, okay? So, blade shape is, blade design and shape is excellent. Edge retention is good. CRKT does Aussate very well, better certainly than, Cold Steel's Aussate A, similar to, maybe 154 CM. It doesn't quite get to that level. I would compare it to the 14C28N that Kershaw has. Good edge retention. What I like about Aussate is the finish that it takes is very, very beautiful. And it's a pretty tough steel for a budget steel. Okay, so that's blade. Let's move into deployment. Now, I cannot tell you how smooth this knife is. It is amazing. Now, maybe that's just a one-off. Maybe everyone else's is not as nice as this, but this one deploys just beautifully. I'm impressed over and over again every time I handle it. And everybody who I've let handle it is like, wow, I can't believe how smooth that is. Just falls into the handle. The detent is just right to allow for a good flipping action. This is a fantastic knife. Now, it does have the lock system so that you can slide this up, and all it does, as I've said many, many times, is puts a little piece of metal behind the lock bar. So what it means is you can't disengage this lock now. It does not turn it into a virtual flex blade or any of that stuff. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit on this. There you go. Let's see. I will just actuate it now. I'm not sure. Here's the little switch. You push it up, and now you can't disengage the lock because there's a little piece of metal holding it over. Push it back, and now you can disengage and close the knife. Now, what I've got to say about this, by the way, it's only flipper deployment, no thumb studs at all, so you flip this knife only. If you want to open it slowly, you can sort of do a gentle flip and push it open with your finger like that. Or do a two-handed opening, because I know, you certainly don't want anyone thinking, holy cow, he's got a switchblade or anything. And of course, that's non-knife people who are thinking like that. But anyway, come back to the blade itself. The deployment is great. It does have the locks feature. It's not auto locks, which makes it good. Now, the liner, I will say it looks on camera a little thin, but when you compare this to other liner lock knives, you realize all of a sudden that it's actually quite thick. It's just that the handle is so big and the knife is so big overall that it looks thinner than it really is. It's sort of an optical illusion. This is every bit as thick as, for example, the Rat Model 1, which is often said to have a very good thick liner lock. And so this also has a very good thick liner lock. It's just that it's a big knife, so it looks a little thinner. And I'm not going to say that it couldn't have a thicker one. I would always be in favor of that. Now, I don't know, I want to move to the handle, and there's a couple things I want to mention about the handle, but I'm going to mention this one thing at this point because it's sort of in this area. The flipper here was a little sharp, and you know, I could probably talk about this under ergonomics, I could probably talk about it during blade, but I'm going to do it now. The flipper was a little sharp, and I took a sharpening rod and just rounded these edges ever so slightly. It's not bad at all now, but before there was just a little bit of roughness when you'd slide your finger along that front choil. Okay, the other thing that I want to say, and this is kind of moving us into handle, is for ergonomics, it would be nice if there was just a small area here without this swedge that would allow you to put your finger here. Your thumb naturally falls to that position, but because of the cutout here, because of the swedge at the top, it's only a thin piece of metal, which means if you're pushing really hard on this, it's going to get really uncomfortable, and what you need to do is move your thumb back and put it here on the handle. Then it's fine, but it would have been nice to have the added leverage that comes from moving your thumb out a little further. So not the end of the world, but it's just a slight detraction in terms of comfort and ergonomics. The other thing I would say is the locks switch can be a little tough to get to, although I never use it, so I don't even notice that. Let me back off so I can continue with the rest of the discussion here. Getting to the handle is very comfortable. Now, of course, part of that is to be expected because a thick, big handle is more comfortable. By nature, it's going to be. When it's 5/8 of an inch thick, it's going to be comfortable. How could it not be? And I mentioned this before, but think about holding onto a chopstick versus holding onto a broom handle, and right away you get it, right? All of a sudden you go, oh yeah, a bigger handle is obviously more comfortable. Now there's limits to that. You wouldn't want it to be this giant round thing, but this handle is very, very ergonomic, and it's excellent both in standard and reverse grip. Okay, it's very good in reverse grip, and probably if you're into knife fighting, which I'm not at all, and if you train this way, this would be a very good option for you. Now, as I said, I think there are better options for a combat knife. I see this more in an EDC, even a little bit into a hard use roll. But I mean, it's kind of too beautiful to hard use. You could almost say this is a large gentleman's folder with the way it looks, and I don't think you'd be out of line that way. And I've taught, and it's interesting, I have shown this to non-knife people, and they've been like, wow, that is such a cool knife. Now, when I'm talking about the handle, it's aluminum and G10. I will say the aluminum can be a little slick. As you're handling this knife, when I close it, I like to hold on to it here at the top and do this. Well, it can be a little slick, and I have almost dropped it a couple times. That's only because I do that kind of unique thing when I hold it. The G10 is very comfortable, and it does have a bit of a pattern on it. There is jimping at the back, especially for a reverse grip. You can kind of see it here. The pocket clip is 4-way repositionable, which is a win as far as I'm concerned, although of course I'm going to have it right side tip up because that's how I always do if I can. The one other thing I would say is the fit and finish on this is only so-so. You know, these parts are going to be put together. They're going to be coming off a line, a production line, and assembled without any kind of, they're just throwing them together, right? Which is fine, but there's just a slight, you can see here as the G10 transitions into the aluminum, there's a bit of a, you can feel a bit of a ridge there, okay? So it's not the end of the world. I still, you know, it's still very comfortable, but if you're someone who pays really close attention to fit and finish, you may notice that. And certainly I noticed that there was a bit of a transition edge there. It's not uncomfortable. You don't notice it when you're using the knife, but if you do sort of a close examination, you will see that. All right, small lanyard hole here. Maybe you could get 550 cord through it, but it would be close. Certainly if you gutted it and pulled it through like with a smaller string, you could pull it off. Overall, I've got to say that this is one of my new favorites. I totally love this blade. I carry it a lot. Even though it's too big for, you know, I probably shouldn't carry it in some of the places that I do, but it is so awesome that I can't help myself. Very, very comfortable, very, very nice. The pocket clip does work. You can see that it's a fairly thin piece of steel here, and the weight of this knife means that you could bend this pocket clip if you're not careful. It hasn't been an issue for me, but I would have liked to see maybe a double screw. You know, instead of up and down, you could have kept this width and gone side by side here. Again, not the end of the world. The knife still looks and functions well, but I've got to say, overall, I highly recommend this knife. I totally love it. As I said, probably am more enamored with this knife after carrying it for a month or two than I was when I first got it, and I just like it more and more and more. So obviously there's a bias there. I'm a big fan of this knife, but I think I've tried to be fair with some of the negatives. It's not perfect, and you wouldn't expect for this price point. Oh yeah, by the way, one last thing. When this came out, it was quite expensive, probably $70 or $80. The price has dropped considerably, so now I would say it's more in line with maybe where it should have been in the first place, probably around $50 or $60. And for that price point, this is a fantastic, fantastic knife. If it was a higher price point, some of those minor detractions, I would say would have been major detractions, okay? What I will say is for that price point, I don't have anything that does that. So, great blade. I'm extremely impressed with this, and I'm definitely going to be far more favorable toward this version. I'm not really a fan at all of the all black version. Anyway, that's my take on the CRKT Eraser designed by Liang Ma. Do one last close-up because this is such a gorgeous blade. Come on, listen camera. There we go. Do one last close-up there for you. There it is. Totally awesome. I'm really, really impressed with this knife. And I think if you're looking at this, you need to know they are discontinued. So you better move fairly fast. And I will say the price is much nicer than it was when they first came out, okay? So you're probably looking at, I think I paid 40 something, high 40s for this one. Anyway, that's my take on the Liang Ma Eraser. I totally love it, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.